Rushing along the Northeast Corridor, an AEM-7 electric locomotive pulls an Amtrak regional train north toward Boston. For over 35 years, Amtrak's AEM-7 locomotives have been transporting passengers along the eastern seaboard between the major cities of Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. They've also been used regularly on Amtrak's Keystone Corridor between New York, Philadelphia, and Harrisburg. In spring of 2016, the last of these locomotives were removed from regular Amtrak passenger service. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Our story begins in the mid-1970s. Amtrak took over passenger train service in the United States in 1971, using locomotives and passenger cars that were previously owned by other railroads. Most of this equipment was already well worn and falling apart. In the Northeast, where locomotives were powered by overhead electrical wires, Amtrak was using GG1 electric locomotives built for the Pennsylvania Railroad in the 1930s and 40s. Amtrak needed new electric locomotives and fast. In 1974, Amtrak ordered the first electric locomotives to replace the old GG1s. These first replacements, built by General Electric, were called E60s. The E60s never performed as well as Amtrak had hoped. They were quite heavy locomotives and as a result were unsafe to operate at higher speeds. Eventually they were limited to a maximum speed of 90 miles per hour, even though they were designed to run as fast as 120 miles per hour. Amtrak continued to search for another replacement. In 1976, two new electric locomotives were tested by Amtrak. Of these two, a Swedish-built locomotive called an RC4 was chosen as the best design. Following this, the RC4 was used as a model in designing the AEM-7. General Swedish Electric Company, or ASEA for short, designed the locomotives and built many of the electrical components. Electromotive Division, owned at the time by General Motors, manufactured the AEM-7s at their plant in LaGrange, Illinois. The bodies were built by the Budd Company of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. AEM-7s were capable of pulling passenger trains at speeds up to 125 miles per hour, with a top speed of 135 miles per hour. They could put out a maximum of 7,000 horsepower and had control cabs at both ends so they could be operated in either direction without having to turn the locomotive around. AEM-7s weighed in at just over 100 tons. The A in the locomotive's model designation indicates the company ASEA that designed the locomotive, the EM for the builder Electromotive Division, and the 7 for the 7,000 maximum horsepower. Amtrak ordered 30 AEM-7 locomotives in 1977. The first locomotive was completed in 1979 and entered service shortly thereafter. The AEM-7 proved to be a huge success. With the arrival of the AEM-7, the last GG1s could finally be retired and the E60s were used only on the slower, long-distance passenger trains. Eventually, a total of 54 AEM-7s were built for Amtrak. Another 4 were built for the Maryland Area Regional Commuter Train, or MARC, and 7 for the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, known as SEPTA. In the early 2000s, Amtrak rebuilt just over half of their AEM-7s from the more traditional direct current, or DC, to run on alternating current, or AC. The rest of the AEM-7s were overhauled but continued to run on direct current. The easiest spotting feature of the AC locomotives is the addition of 2 large resistor boxes located above the cab at each end of the locomotive. During this time, the last of the E60 locomotives were also replaced by the new HHP-8, a locomotive that would also be plagued with reliability issues. The AEM-7s continued to be the mainstay of Amtrak's fleet of electric locomotives, but they too were beginning to show their age. Amtrak found a replacement for both the AEM-7 and the HHP-8 in 2010 when they ordered 70 brand new ACS-64 locomotives designed and built by Siemens in Sacramento, California. As they were completed, the new ACS-64 City Sprinter locomotives were shipped east on long-distance Amtrak trains across the country to Washington, D.C., with the first one arriving in 2014. Tests indicated that the locomotives performed well, and new locomotives were placed into service shortly after their arrival. Over the next 2 years, AEM-7s and HHP-8s were quickly withdrawn from service. By the end of 2014, all HHP-8s were placed in storage. The last of the AEM-7 DC locomotives were pulled from active service in April of 2015, and several were scrapped, leaving behind little more than the memories and a pile of parts. Only the AEM-7 AC rebuilds remained in service. By the beginning of 2016, very few AEM-7s remained active in Amtrak's fleet, and by April all had been removed from Amtrak service. 3 of them were loaned to Mark Commuter Rail in Maryland until their new diesel locomotives arrived, but even their time was running out. At the end of April 2016, Amtrak announced one final fan trip to be pulled by 2 AEM-7 locomotives in recognition of their some 37 years and over 220 million miles of service. The trip, scheduled for Saturday, June 18, 2016, was planned to run from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia on the Northeast Corridor, with a planned photo stop and a shop tour at Amtrak's shops in Wilmington, Delaware. Not a month after the trip announcement, Amtrak executives made a trip of their own to California to celebrate the completion of the final ACS-64 locomotive. The AEM-7 has served Amtrak well for many years, but now its time has come, like many before, to disappear into history. Let's travel to Washington, D.C. to give these remarkable locomotives a proper send-off as we say farewell to the AEM-7. We begin our journey on Friday, June 17, 2016. This is the Northeast Corridor, the busiest passenger rail line in North America. It is clear that the ACS-64 is the new face of the corridor. With all the AEM-7s and HHP-8s now in storage, every single train other than the Acela Express is pulled by an ACS-64. Speaking of the Acela, here's one now as it races through the Seabrook Mark commuter station. The Acela Express is the fastest train in North America, reaching speeds of up to 150 miles per hour. On this section of the corridor, they travel as fast as 135 miles per hour. Amtrak owns the Northeast Corridor, but many different commuter railroads also use portions of the line. Here in Maryland, Mark commuter trains carry passengers between Perryville, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. A Mark commuter train makes a station stop at Seabrook on its way to Washington. The train is being pushed by an HHP-8 locomotive. While Amtrak has now retired all their HHP-8s, Mark still uses a few of these locomotives. In the next few years, they will all be replaced by new diesel locomotives built by Siemens. An Amtrak regional train passes by Bowie pulled by an ACS-64. The regionals are the backbone of the Northeast Corridor, carrying thousands of people throughout the Northeast. They travel as far south as Norfolk, Virginia, and as far north as Boston. For a while now, Mark has been using AEM-7s from Amtrak to pull some of their commuter trains. The last 3 operational Amtrak AEM-7s are all in service with Mark. Here, we see locomotive number 917 powering a Mark train as it stops at the Bowie commuter station. The commuter train heads down the line as it disappears in the distance. The next day, Saturday, June 18, 2016, will be the last run of the AEM-7s on Amtrak as they pull the special excursion train from Washington to Philadelphia and return. It is early on Saturday morning, and we are at Union Station in Washington, D.C. for the farewell excursion of the AEM-7 locomotives. Today's trip will take us over the southern leg of the Northeast Corridor between the cities of Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, a distance of about 135 miles. The excursion was completely sold out with nearly 500 tickets purchased. The train consists of 2 AEM-7 locomotives, 7 coach cars, a cafe car, and Amtrak's private car, the Beech Grove. In the cafe car, many pieces of memorabilia from the AEM-7s are being offered for sale to fans. On the front of the train is locomotive number 942. With fading paint and rusty spots, this locomotive is really showing its age. But it still has one more full day of work ahead running up and down the Northeast Corridor.
Good morning, everyone.
Everyone is on board and the train departs Washington right on time at 9:10 a.m. As it leaves Union Station, it meanders through the massive yard here used to store Amtrak, MARC, and Virginia Railway Express trains between runs. A few miles up the line, the special flies through Bowie. At Halethorpe, Maryland, passengers detrain for the opportunity to photograph the train in motion. Once everyone is off the train, it reverses out of the station. On the far track, the southbound Carolinian flies past, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. With the southbound train out of the way, the special pulls into the station as people take their photos and videos. The train comes to a stop and passengers reboard. From here, the train will continue north and east to Philadelphia, the next planned stop. Once again moving along, the special passes through rural countryside and sleepy communities on its way to Philadelphia. The train is now through Baltimore as it picks up speed, traveling well over 100 miles per hour.
We're getting back to triple-digit speeds here as we're heading towards the Northeast.
Zooming along, the train passes over several rivers on the northern end of the Chesapeake Bay. With no scheduled stops and few other trains on this Saturday morning, the trip to Philly seems to fly by.
About potential replacements. So here comes Cameron Grayson, the Susquehanna Bridge here. Saying this about the Susquehanna. As you look at this river, most of that river is only about 16 feet.
Go ahead, get your shot.
25 feet, if I recall. So say hello to Mother Susquehanna, one of them.
CSX Market Street branch. Where's the largest?
soon enough the train is passing Wilmington, Delaware, and the Amtrak shops located here. Passengers will return to Wilmington in the afternoon for a tour of the massive shop complex.
2 cents. I'd love to get in there.
Oh, 642 and 42. Oh, and 145 are there.
Pretty old facility. Look at that. Hey, Verizon there.
Very old Verizon.
I know that's been sitting there for a while now. They just moved it. It used to be the back shops back there.
Go underneath the jump off that carries the high-speed track to over the north straight only track. So we'll be to our left. The highway is U.S. Route 13. By the way, we're approaching Claymont, Delaware. The Claymont Station.
13.
And
Interstate 495.
At Philadelphia, the train is stocked with boxed lunches for the passengers. It then proceeds through the station to the east to be turned on a Y track. Once the train is turned, it makes another brief stop in Philadelphia before beginning the return trip to Washington, D.C.
I'd love to get in there. There's a sign full of like old.
That works. Did they ever get that third track done?
On the way back, the train makes its last stop at the Wilmington, Delaware Amtrak shops. Here, the railroad stores and maintains much of its equipment on the East Coast. A large machine shop is located here for heavy repairs or modifications to the locomotives and cars. Of particular interest today are all the stored AEM-7 and HHP-8 locomotives. All of the HHP-8s and most of the AEM-7 AC rebuilds are not actually owned by Amtrak, but instead leased. Since the lease on these locomotives has not yet ended, it is not known at this time what their ultimate destiny will be. Some other pieces of equipment are also on display here as well. The train reboards for the last time and begins the final stretch to Washington. It is well into the afternoon, and we wait for one final view of the special train. We are at Edgewood, Maryland. A bridge crosses the Bush River here, not too far from where it empties into the Chesapeake Bay. The bridge is one of several aging double-track bridges that restrict the flow of train traffic on the Northeast Corridor. Like the AEM-7s, it too is scheduled for replacement in the not-too-distant future. The light of locomotive 942 appears in the distance as it leads its train over the bridge and heads into the afternoon sun. The engineer sounds the locomotive's air horn as the train nears the west bank of the river. In no time at all, the train will be pulling into Washington Union Station, bringing to a close the AEM-7's long career on Amtrak. The AEM-7 was an Amtrak success story. It arrived at a time when reliable locomotives were desperately needed, and now they pass on the baton to the next in line, the ACS-64, a locomotive that also promises to serve the railroad well. AEM-7 number 915 has been donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania for future generations to enjoy. One of the parts saved from an original AEM-7 DC locomotive that was scrapped was an air horn, believed to be from locomotive number 910. This 5-chime horn, called the K5LA, was designed specifically for use on Amtrak to play a happy, cheerful chord when all 5 notes are properly playing. This horn, much like the AEM-7's, sounds worn out and tired after years of use, playing only 4 of the 5 notes. It is sounded off one more time here as a final farewell to the legacy of these locomotives. To the locomotive that was nicknamed Toaster because of its looks and Meatball because of its designer, we say farewell to the AEM-7. Hey everyone, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. A special thanks to the Amtrak team for putting on this final farewell excursion. If you have any questions or comments about the AEM-7, be sure to leave those below. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.